A massive YouTuber claimed I made a false accusation after I did an investigation into a splice in a speedrun. He said I got it wrong. So in this video, I'm going to walk you through what he didn't show. But first, let's rewind to when all this happened. I was making a comparison video. This is something that I had done with the top 2 runners in the past. Blink was my friend, and he had just gotten a world record, so I wanted to make a video for him as well. While editing, something really jumped out at me, and that was that Blink's transitions seemed to happen faster than everyone else's, often 4 to 8 frames. Transitions for Breath of Fire on Super Nintendo are deterministic, meaning they're always the same. I also noticed that in the transitions there were some odd artifacts that weren't there for anybody else. I remember thinking, this is weird, because aside from 1 frame capture differences, everyone should always be the exact same. Blink and I were friends, so it isn't like I wanted to suspect him. These anomalies could be innocent, but it was also glaring. I had to look deeper. At first I actually thought that he was overclocking, but the problem with that is that it wasn't all the transitions, and when I tested the animations, they were all exactly the same. So, I form a hypothesis, and that is that Blink is pre-recording his segments and then splicing them together after the fact. He could save, exit the area, and then repeat indefinitely until he got a time that he was happy with. That would give him as many attempts as he needs for RNG, but allow him to keep his experience and his stats in order. It is very difficult to hide an edit in audio, so my thought is to turn to audio forensics. I know I need methodology and a stronger understanding of what exactly I am looking for. To me, the best place for that is a forensics textbook. I'm going to go over that with you, but first I need to make sure that everyone is on the same page with how waves work. This is a wave. Think of a wave as an up and down repeating pattern. When 2 waves that are the same overlap, they combine and become stronger. That is called constructive interference. When waves are opposite, they cancel out. That canceling effect is called destructive interference. Because the waves have the same amount of energy when they collide, they destroy each other. If the waves aren't lined up and they're not polar opposite, you get a mix. Sometimes the waves will spike, and other times they will weaken, both of which will happen unpredictably. This is called intermittent interference, and it is mostly what we're going to be talking about. Whenever an external device records anything, it is also recording the external hum from the power grid. In real hardware setups, you will see the hum from both the recording and the game footage. This means you would expect the signals to get stronger because they're recorded at the same time. There are things that can disrupt this, but the signals combining would immediately exonerate him. In Blink speedrun audio, we can see that there's intermittent interference anytime the microphone turns on. You can tell when the microphone is being turned on because this signal is also being captured. If it was just a blip or only happened 1 or 2 times, that would be different. This is consistent throughout the entire video. Consistency suggests abnormal. That doesn't mean tampering, it could be something like a ground loop, but it is concerning. We're going to look for another video recorded in that environment that is very unlikely to be tampered with. Luckily for us, Blink has his first playthrough of Breath of Fire and a casual playthrough of another Super Nintendo game which was recorded between 2 PBs. In both videos, main hum combines perfectly. That is exactly what we would expect to see from a video that has not been tampered with. I also made a control where I replicated Blink's splice. Only in the control and the splice was there disruption in main hum. Blink having interference in his PBs but not his casual stuff was dubious. The purpose of the next analysis is to see if we can find individual edit points. It would need to be extremely precise to fit my hypothesis. So let me explain spectral analysis. It, like mains hum, uses the spectrogram, but it uses it in a different way. A spectrogram is a gradient between frequency resolution and time resolution. The more you have of one, the less you have of the other. We use high frequency detail to look at mains hum and we use high time detail to look for edit points. Audio is recorded in much higher detail than video. There are hundreds of samples for every frame of video. That means when you cut and rejoin two recordings, that smooth flow of audio is disrupted. On a spectrogram, that looks like a straight vertical line, and that happens because all the frequencies become active at once. Now, a lot of things can cause a vertical line in the spectrogram. A keyboard click, in-game sound, bumping the mic. But we're looking for a sharp vertical line covering all frequencies. And after that, we need to confirm whether or not it's coming from the environment. Let me give you a quick demonstration. When Blink enters town, you can visually see when he splits. You can also see this other, larger marker during the transition. We can see that the item on the left does not cover the full spectrogram, and the item on the right has no correlating in-game or environmental sound. But the deeper you look, the worse it gets. Most people think doing an edit during a black screen with no audio is a great idea. But here's the catch. If there's a big audio spike in a part of the game where there's not supposed to be any sound, it becomes really difficult to explain, especially when it doesn't show up for any other runner. And when splicing a video, you have to get it on the exact right frame. If you're off by even a little, that transition is going to be shorter or longer than you want. And because video compression can save frames from what you were doing earlier, when you do it on a black screen, sometimes it will leave ghost frames. These faint outlines are very likely ghost frames. So let's recap the inculpatory factors in Blink's run. When we checked to see if the game footage and the microphone were recorded at the same time, what we see is interference that suggests that it was not. But in his casual and first playthrough, everything looked clean. We see audio markers in the spectrogram that are consistent with edit points. And those edit points line up with the transitions with the suspicious artifacts. All of this is exactly what you would expect to see from a run that had been tampered with. 2 reports were created to support Abyssoft in his claim that I made a false accusation. While the technical stuff is still fresh in your mind, let's take a look at the reports. The author of the first report was attempting to find individual splice points with MainsHum. As we talked about earlier, we used MainsHum to determine if there was interference in the video as a whole. Being that you use a high frequency spectrogram, it is not suited to find splice points. This would only be useful if you already knew where the splice point was, and as you can see, he had to ask Dwango, somebody we'll talk about later, where the timestamp of the splice point was. It would take hours to find an edit using this method because you have to look at such a narrow time range. He used this method on a custom splice which this Dwango fellow had made and performed at a GDQ. It involves frame perfectly switching the scene in OBS, and it is not a realistic method to use. In fact, the author determines that it would be too difficult for Blink to perform. From the outset, his hypothesis was that my method was faulty, and he concluded he was correct. Unfortunately, this is not the methodology that we used. Report 2 was primarily focused on whether or not the game was run on a real SNES, but that was never contested, so I'm not going to talk about it. He does confirm that there's intermittent interference, but he only briefly touches on the splicing. In part of the report, they label a marker as a keyboard click. It is this keyboard click, but the other marker, only 0.2 of a second later, was ignored. It is difficult to reconcile how this was missed, considering it would be visible at almost any zoom in the spectrogram. But things would only become more concerning. I gave Abyssoft a list of 27 timestamps of suspected edit points. Of those 27, I had 5 bracketed out as potentially environmental noise. Now I want you to take a minute to think about if you were examining this, what would you look at? Would you use random selection? Would you examine everything? Would you take the most probable? Now ask yourself what you would do if you wanted to avoid finding evidence. JRP tested 3 more markers, all 3 of which came out of the 5 that were marked as probably being environmental. The odds of that happening through random selection are 0.34%. The real question is, did he pick the timestamps himself, or was he provided them? I reached out to JRP for clarification, but I didn't get a response. Now, let's hear what Abyssoft has to say about the reports.
When it comes to conclusions, all of the reports are in agreement. Blink is running on a real console.
I mentioned that Blink was playing on a Super Nintendo as one of the earliest messages that I had sent Abyssoft.
The power cycle is consistent with an SNES.
I was talking about spectral analysis here, but even if we follow that logic, why does it not show up here? Or here? Or here? Should it not always be the same?
The degradation of the signal during a screen transition is expected due to the video feed interference weakening as the feed fades to black.
What he said is technical word salad, but let's just assume it isn't. The logic that follows is that every transition would have the same behavior. Surely some of the other runners would have experienced this expected signal degradation, right?
And there isn't any evidence that the run was spliced. This was the same conclusion that myself and Duango reached in our initial analysis.
There isn't any evidence, or he didn't show you any evidence. And what was that last part again?
This was the same conclusion that myself and Duango reached in our initial analysis.
That sounds a lot like they had drawn their conclusions before ever reading the reports. He put a lot of weight into the experts, but who determined they were experts? Experts of what? Everything I've told you was fully available. I acted in good faith and I gave them an abundance of information. What I didn't know is that things were about to take a turn in a direction I did not see coming. When the video did come out, I realized I'd been set up. Notifications were coming in en masse. Every video on my tiny little YouTube got ratioed. When I watched Abyssoft's video, I realized he had taken some minor administrative detail and made it the entire story. So let me set the record straight. I typically use Audacity, but in this case, I wanted to use Adobe Audition because it had video as well as audio. I used the AI to navigate the similar features between the 2 pieces of software. I flat out say it is not good for analysis. Abyssoft acknowledges that I am using it to navigate Adobe Audition. The reason I included the AI stuff at all is because I was working in good faith and I had done some experiments in there I kind of thought were cool. I even mentioned that he should reach out if he needs clarification because there are a lot of things that could be taken out of context and make me look bad. And that is exactly what he did. Abyssoft made the entire story about ChatGPT and it blindsided me. He stated that over-amplification caused misleading artifacts. My question is, what and where? We increase amplification in main sound because the signal is hard to detect. Extra amplification doesn't introduce intermittent interference. If anything, it would obscure it. And you don't even really use amplification for spectral analysis. I'm told that the lead investigator is a guy named Duango, and that he would answer any questions that I have. He lets me know right away that everything is on record. Okay. When we get to the reports, I ask him specifically what they prove or disprove. I also ask if he would stand by that they used forensic methodology. His response was, he didn't like my tone. Just before the video was released, there was a ton of pressure on me to say that I would accept the results in advance. They did that by dangling the idea of a local recording, which is a special type of recording that holds metadata, which is extremely hard to tamper with. That metadata would essentially exonerate him. He asked me what could be done to change my mind, and I said if I could see the recordings. His response was they didn't actually have any recordings. He threw Abyssoft under the bus, and I'll just say, I've never seen anyone use the word subject matter expert this many times in such a short period. It would very quickly get to the point where any direct question would result in a mental health catastrophe or a personal emergency. In fact, I had to repeatedly ask him to stop sharing the gory details of his mental health problems. He would eventually cross the line with a grotesque allegation that I won't name. It was bizarre emotional blackmail, completely unprofessional, and I ended the conversation on the spot. When Abyssoft stepped in and presented himself as an authority, we welcomed him. I stepped back because I believed he would conduct a fair and unbiased investigation. He said it wasn't a hit piece, and he talked a lot about being unbiased, but is it really fair to say that when you're using clown music over someone's explanation?
Initial video, he says that a mod told him audio was a good way to find splices and that they sent him a video.
Now, I'm sure Abyssoft will respond to this. And to be clear, I'm not perfect. There are legitimate criticisms about my original demonstration, but it is not fair to frame a bad demonstration as a bad investigation, especially when you know otherwise. Do you think Abyssoft is going to say these were accidental or intentional? When I asked Blink to prove he was in control of the game, I did so because I knew he wouldn't be able to do it, and he didn't. People may not like that I did it that way, and that's fair, but I did it for a reason, and it worked. Why is there no main-sum interference in any of Blink's casual stuff or for any other runner? Why do the spectral markers line up with the problematic transitions? Why does everything line up? And why is it only Blink? I never had a problem with being proven wrong, but the reports take advantage of people's lack of technical experience. 3 out of the 4 of them went into this investigation with the assumption that I was wrong, and their investigation bore that out. And it bore it out in the court of public opinion through misrepresentation and omission. They were so focused on me, they didn't actually even authenticate Blink's video. They took the role of expert while their scope was necessarily more limited than mine because they only focused on me. And even there, they only engaged superficially. They claimed my methodology was flawed, but they never engaged with it. They claimed my evidence was flawed while actively seeking out benign targets. Are these the mistakes of experts? So I'll say it again. Experts of what? This is physical evidence. You can't argue whether or not it is there. You can only argue why it is there. Look, I'm a friendly person. Contextually, I can see how it probably doesn't look like that right now. But I also care about the integrity of the people and things around me. It isn't like I wanted drama, and maybe the next guy doesn't speak out because he saw what Abyssoft did to me. Had he provided literally anything, I would have just moved on. But what he did was dishonest, and I wasn't going to stand for that. One thing I'll add is leave Blink alone. Nobody deserves to be harassed like I was. Regardless of whether you believe me or not, he does not deserve the same treatment. At worst, he wanted something too bad. And this goes for everyone that I'm talking about. Harassing people is not a good way to support me. If you want to support me, the best thing that you can do is leave a like or maybe a nice comment. Abyssoft is a big, full-time YouTuber, and I'm just some guy. If you think what I said was compelling, sharing would really help me out.